Welcome back to the channel. Recently, Elon Musk stuck a finger in the eye of Gavin Newsom. He announced that SpaceX and Twitter, or X, are moving the headquarters out of California towards sane states in his mind. And the reason is that Gavin Newsom signed a bill called AB1955 that is about schools and about children and about gay and lesbian children, transgender children. And that bill is controversial. Okay, I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the bill. I'm going to talk about Elon's reaction. I'm going to talk about this from the perspective of somebody who studies policy. That's right. I'm a policy expert. That's what I do in my day job. I study policy. I also live in California. And I'm just a reminder on YouTube that not everyone who lives in California is mentally ill. There's a few of us who still have some basic common sense. And I'm going to walk you through this bill and what it means and some of the policy implications. And I think I'm going to say things that other people haven't said. And that's why I'm going to make the video. All right. So first, what is AB 1955? What is this bill that's gotten everyone up in arms? I read the bill, I actually read the text of the bill, and here's what it is. It's being depicted as a bill that prevents teachers from telling parents if a child in class declares themselves transgendered, a young kid in school. The teacher cannot tell the parents. That's how it's being portrayed in the media. I read the bill. It's actually a little bit more complicated than that. It's a double or triple negative. Here's what it is. The state government is preventing any school district or charter school, any school, the state government is preventing local school districts from having a policy that compels or mandates a teacher to disclose to parents if a kid comes out in class as gay or says, I want to use different pronouns or something like that. So the state government prohibits the local government or a charter school from creating a mandatory disclosure policy among the teachers. That's what the bill does. The state preventing local districts from making the teacher tell the parent. Okay. The reason that's, to me, the first interesting thing is that California has a few red counties and a lot of extreme liberal places in San Francisco and in LA. This bill will have zero impact on most of California because no place in California, in San Francisco, for instance, is going to have a school district create a policy that forces teachers to tell parents in the first place. The school district's not going to do that in the first place because they're already on the extreme left end of the spectrum. The only places that this could possibly apply to are places like Bakersfield and inland California. I'm not even sure how much it would apply to those districts because those places may not even be passing these bills in the first place, okay? So the state is thwarting the local governments or the local school district from having this policy. That's what it is. The next thing. As far as I can tell from reading the bill, there's one more thing. It also prevents the parent from seeking damages against a teacher who doesn't disclose this information. For instance, if the teacher is keeping it a secret that the child is transgendered and something happens to that child, the teacher cannot be held culpable for not telling the parent. That's also what the bill does. That might be a more impactful part of the bill. But the first part of the bill is prohibiting local districts. Okay, then the next part of it. As far as I can tell, the bill doesn't actually stop a teacher who wants to tell the parent that a child has come and identified themselves as transgendered or gay or lesbian. It doesn't actually prevent the teacher from telling the parent. It just prevents the school district from making a teacher who doesn't want to do it tell the parent. That's what the bill does. Okay, but the teacher's still free to do it, according to my reading of the bill. And anyone who's a legal expert can put in the comments here if I've misread this, okay, the text of the statute. Okay, in response to this, Elon, and I think lots of people, because I think that nationally this has got to be a pretty unpopular bill, but Elon has announced that he is withdrawing the headquarters of X and SpaceX from California, taking those jobs, taking that intellectual capital elsewhere, moving it to Texas or where have you, to which the governor doesn't seem to care who signed this bill. Senator Scott Wiener writes, quote, I've long supported keeping tech here and I take plenty of heat for that, but a company headquartering here doesn't mean its CEO gets to decide if LGBTQ Californians have civil rights. If protecting LGBTQ kids' safety is too much for Elon, that says more about him than about SF in California. All right, so they're unrepentant, these politicians. They've lost a lot of jobs. They're going to lose a lot of jobs to push this bill through. They're unrepentant. They are pretty confident they're doing the right thing. Let's just think about this bill from a policy perspective, shall we? As a policy matter. I have to conclude that as a policy matter, this is perhaps the dumbest bill I've ever seen. Literally the dumbest thing you could ever do. And I think from public health standpoint and even policy health standpoint, it's a net negative to the state of California. Let's just walk through how you should think about it. Number one, as I already outlined, This bill is not going to pertain to the vast majority of California where it's ultra-liberal anyway, and they would never pass a mandatory disclosure policy in any school. No impact there. It only pertains to a handful of places that might do that. I don't even think they've done it yet, but they might do it in the future. They're blocked from doing it. Okay. In those districts, there are many, many, many kids. There are probably many kids in those districts who are gay or transgendered who are happy to have that conversation with their parents because they are in a place or situation where they're comfortable talking about it with their parents. Because after all, it's 2024. It's not like when I grew up in the 1980s. It's 2024. Many kids are comfortable talking about that with their parents. Okay, and many parents might be comfortable having that discussion with their kid. This bill doesn't apply to that. It only applies, and who else doesn't it apply to? If the kid goes to school and says my pronouns are XYZ, the teacher is not required to tell the parent. But that doesn't stop all the other kids in class who might be talking about it. And so a parent who's connected to the other parents on WhatsApp groups or whatever, they might get wind of the fact that this happened in school, even if the teacher wasn't compelled to tell him. And the third person it's not going to apply to is the teacher who hears this, feels like they want to tell the parent, and then they go ahead and tell the parent anyway. It doesn't stop them from telling the parent. So it doesn't apply to all these groups of people. It only applies to the gay or lesbian or transgendered individual whose parents don't know, whose friends don't know, who the word doesn't get around to the parents, and only the teacher knows, and the teacher decides they don't want to tell the parent. That's the person it applies to. So it's already a vanishingly small policy, okay? It makes a big splash in the media because that's the real motivation. These useless political hacks, rather than doing anything of value in a city, they're just trying to signal that they're on the right side of an issue. This is actually impacting probably the tiniest slip. I'd be surprised if you can find me 20 people a year in whom this impacts, that all these things, the teacher didn't want to tell the parents, the friends didn't tell the parents, the student didn't tell the parents, and in the red district where the school had a mandatory disclosure policy because it doesn't apply to the blue districts, I mean, it's got to be vanishingly few. Okay, then let's talk about the good of the student. The bill is written, and it says that students who are in a school environment that supports their sexuality and supports their gender identity, they do better than students not in that environment. They cite some, I'm sure, poorly done study, because obviously it would be non-randomized and it would have many confounders and many problems with that study. They cite that as evidence. And then they also mention the high rate of suicidality among kids with gender identity issues who are thinking about being transgender, the high rate of suicidality, which I think is true. They have a high rate of suicidality. And the bill leads the audience to believe that by passing this bill and having the teacher not be forced to disclose the student's secret to the parents in the few instances where that may occur, the child is less likely to commit suicide and likely to have better mental health and, as Scott Wiener says, protects their civil rights. But they have no evidence that that's true. In fact, I would wager that for every child in America, the two people who feel the strongest that that child shouldn't commit suicide, the two people who are most invested in anybody not committing suicide, is probably the parents. My guess would be that for most people, the parents are the ones who most strongly do not want their kid to commit suicide. We all don't want people to commit suicide, but you feel a lot worse if it's your kid rather than somebody you're reading on the news, obviously. Okay. So the person who's most invested in not having this outcome potentially is being blocked from getting that information. Okay. On the other hand, it may cause some grief in the few instances where the parent is not receptive or doesn't handle it well. To me, it's very difficult to know which one outweighs the other one. In these very vanishingly few cases where this would ever have been an issue, would it have been better off if the parent knew about it versus if the parent didn't know about it? I suspect one could easily argue that it might be better off if the parent knew about it and the parent was brought into that conversation, and maybe the student's fears that the parent would be immediately dismissive and very upset to hear, for instance, that their son is gay or something like that. The parent might be much more open-minded than you thought in the first place because there's often that sort of miscommunication between parents and students, etc. So to me, it's not, that's one. Two, the parent might be able to marshal resources and bring things to the table to help guide the child in this, vulnerable period where the child's trying to figure things out, possibly. To me, it's absolutely unclear that cutting the parent out is going to reduce suicides. If anything, it might increase suicides. I suspect you won't be able to detect this because the signal is so fleetingly rare. Suicide is thankfully still a rare event, and the number of kids impacted by this policy is so fleetingly few that to find that signal in the whole state of California, even with a 50 million population, is probably going to be impossible to find. So this bill, I think, just fails fundamentally to build the convincing case that this is actually in the best interest of the child. End of story. Talking about civil rights of minors, I don't know what that even means because many parents have access to lots of information about a minor child, and no one would say that it's against the parent's civil rights to know the kid has iron deficiency anemia. For instance, so if a kid has some medical issue that they're dealing with, parents have the full right to know about that. No one would say that it's their civil rights to keep that private from their parents. So I think Scott Wiener is completely off the mark. I also think just empirically, the probability that this actually helps anybody is just so fleetingly small. Next. It does anger people, doesn't it? It is obviously something that's very divisive. And if I were to wager, I'd say the entire reason they even passed the bill, I don't think they actually do care about these kids, honestly. I think they're just passing the bill to signal that we pass these kinds of bills and you oppose those kinds of bills. Other people oppose the bills. And we're the good people and you're the bad people. So it's a virtue signaling tactic. That's why they're really doing it, I suspect. That's why they did lots of stupid things. Governor Gavin Newsom, who signed this bill, if I recall, he kept schools closed for a very long period of time in this state, even though COVID posed no essential risk to kids. And, he sent his own kids to private school. Wonderful. Scott Wiener, of course, supported many irrational COVID policies because they're not good at thinking about policies. This policy is going to help few people. It's going to anger a lot of people. Maybe not in California, again, because it's so blue. It's so blue and so to the left that actually you didn't even need this bill for most places. By the way, no school district would have passed that mandatory disclosure policy in, say, San Francisco. You didn't need the bill in the first place. It is really to signal to the national group of people. But nationally, I think it's an unpopular bill. Many people are not going to like it. Elon, I think, is making a clear stand that he doesn't like it, that it's a further intrusion, government intrusion between a parent and a child. In Elon's mind, I think in many people's mind, I think that's how people are going to look at it, and so it's going to piss a lot of people off. Elon pulled the jobs out. Well, unlike the theoretical few people that this bill may apply to, the kid who is transgendered, whose friends don't know, and the friends don't tell their parents, who's told your parent, it's only the kid who's transgendered, who's the other kids don't know in class, but somehow the teacher knows. Okay, only the teacher knows, and the teacher also doesn't want to voluntarily tell the parent, right? So this is a crazy bill that they've created. Few people affected, but Elon is pulling many, many jobs out of the state, and jobs that aren't low-skilled and low-wage jobs, but high-skilled and high-wage jobs. And that has economic impacts on all the children in the district. See, when Elon pulls all the SpaceX and X people out of San Francisco, for instance, that will actually make the San Francisco school district shittier because Elon and all those salaries are improving the education for all these kids in San Francisco, including the transgendered kids in San Francisco. So these policymakers have to weigh the impact of pissing off employers against the theoretical benefit of this bill, which I think is absolutely zero theoretical benefit. The impact of pissing off the employers, which is a real impact in pulling these jobs, which is a real impact in depressing the economic conditions, which is a real impact in having a scarcity situation in your school district, which is also facing a deficit budget. And they're so stupid that they can't think about this. They didn't even have to propose the bill. They could have just been quiet, but they had to pick this fight. And then they want to portray Elon like he's some bad person. He's doing, I think, what probably most Americans are on the side of, which is, actually, probably most Americans wouldn't have even thought to have a mandatory disclosure policy. They would have just felt like it's common courtesy that if the teacher knows something important about a child and something that might have a huge increased risk of suicidality for that kid, like being transgendered, that teacher probably has an obligation to tell the parent who cares the most about this person in the universe, and that parent might try to do things that would reduce that risk of suicidality. That's the parent's duty and job. I think most parents would just assume that that's how the world would function and that local and state governments don't have to have this dueling war. So now what's next? The federal government will pass a bill preventing California from passing a bill that prevents local districts from passing a bill that discloses from the disclosure. It's such a daisy chain of stupidity. Nobody needs to have any bills. You just need to have common sense. Common sense, if the teacher knows something that's important for a kid, they got to tell the parent. And if they don't tell the parent something bad happened, they're going to sue you. That's common sense. Okay, that's common sense. You don't need any bills along the way. Elon naturally, and I think justifiably, is upset by watching politicians so stupid that they don't want to solve homelessness, fentanyl addiction, the shitty state of downtown San Francisco. SF public schools need a lot of help. They don't want to do any of that. They just want to create a bill that antagonizes people to signal their political purity that probably affects a negligibly small number of kids who happen to be in red districts who all those things had to align so that the only person who's a teacher, and the teacher didn't want to say, and then the teacher is shielded from being litigated if the kid does kill himself, or he or she or they kill themselves, the teacher shielded from that litigation. What the hell is going on in this state? That's your priority? Not actually making this state better? Making the city better? Such deranged politics. And then I watched Gavin said, when Elon criticized him and pulled out the jobs, he said something like, "You bent the knee," and put a tweet of Elon supporting Trump, to which Elon says something like, "You never get off your knees." And this is the state of discourse. I mean, they're really just shitting on each other while the whole state sinks into the abyss. In this case, I think, Elon is pretty reasonable, in my opinion, and leveraging the power of economic prosperity to show that the government is ludicrous. And if the citizens of California don't pull their head out of their ass and start voting for people who aren't abject fools and abject derelict politicians, they're going to lose more jobs, and that'll further depress the city and the state. Now, of course, as an employee in California, I'm stuck here for the time being, but I still hate to see a beautiful San Francisco it's the most natural beauty of any city in America, just because of the way it's located, the natural air conditioning in the summer, the hiking. It could be the greatest city if it just weren't run so incompetently. They didn't even need to pass the bill. This was like, the last time I heard them talking about something so stupid was when they had that mandatory COVID-19 vaccine bill to go to school, which they dropped because even these insane people, they realized what a stupid bill that was, and so they dropped it. But this, they somehow rammed all the way through because they somehow think their political prospects are better if this were to go through. I struggle to think that they actually think this is best for kids, because for those vanishingly few kids to whom it applies, we just have no credible evidence that keeping the parent out of that discussion is actually better for the kid. There's incredible reason to believe that including the parent in the discussion would be better for the kid. So in fact, that even for those few transgendered individuals to whom this bill might someday have had an impact on, they might have just done them a disservice as well. But the mountains of children whose lives are being affected by the decline of California, they don't seem to weigh those people in the calculus or the civil rights of those kids, which just shows how, I think, incompetent a senator like Scott Wiener is, and the governor is, just purely incompetent. So this is a policy analysis. This is how you should think about policy. You can't just come in hot-handed. Parents should know, this. I mean, you don't need to do that. You can just think very logically. What are the potential upsides, potential downsides, and how many people does it apply to? And if you're getting into the double or triple digit negative, as this thing does, you might want to not do that. California would be better off if we had politicians that just didn't do anything, rather than actually make it worse all the time. That we just need to. I just want to run a platform. I'm not going to run, by the way. But if I ever ran on a platform, it would just run on the platform of, I'm actually just not going to do anything. Just not going to do anything, which is actually a lot better than actively screwing it up. Actively screwing it up is a lot worse than just not doing anything. So, all right, there it is. That's AB 1955. If I got any of the legal part of the bill incorrect, please put that in the comments, especially if you are an expert in such topics. But I think, in terms of my understanding, this reflects my understanding of the bill, and I think that it's not a student privacy law. And also the final thing is the teacher can still decide to tell the parents anyway. None of this actually prohibits the teacher from telling the parents. There are probably many teachers in those red districts who are themselves on the red, on the right side of the conservative side of the political spectrum, and they're going to tell the parents anyway. So actually, it may not have any impact at all. So that's what you get in California. All right. Well, you like this video, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, comment, leave a message below. you'll get this kind of policy analysis on this channel. Subscribe to Vinay Prasad's Observations and Thoughts. I think that's where I put a lot of my thoughts in freeform writing, and I try to mostly focus on medical matters. This, I think, to some degree is a medical and health matter, and thus I thought it should be analyzed through the same policy lens. So until next time.